It started like the perfect day, the kind of day a little girl dreams about. The sun was warm, the sky crystal blue, and the spring breeze carried the scent of cotton candy, funnel cakes, and fresh hay. Lena Brooks, 9 years old and bursting with excitement, gripped the edge of her wheelchair as she looked out over the fairgrounds that had sprung up in the middle of Oak Grove Park. It was the annual Spring Pet Fair, hosted by the local HOA, and for months Lena had counted down the days like it was Christmas morning. Danielle, her mother, had made sure her calendar was marked, her chair was tuned, and her favorite pink hoodie was clean and ready. This wasn't just a fair, it was a promise. A promise that, for one afternoon, Lena could just be a kid. Not the girl in the chair, not the girl with a condition, just Lena, with her big laugh and even bigger heart. "Do you think I'll get to hold a baby goat today?" she asked, practically vibrating in her seat. Danielle smiled and adjusted the blanket over her daughter's legs. "I think you'll do more than that. I heard they've got miniature ponies and an alpaca named Kevin." Lena burst into laughter. "Kevin? That's such a people name," Danielle winked. "That's what makes it funny." They rolled into the fairgrounds together, music playing from a speaker stand, children laughing, bubbles drifting through the air. It was the kind of scene that made you believe in community again. Neighbors talking over lemonade, kids chasing each other past rows of rescue animals, and volunteers handing out flyers with big smiles. For Lena, it was paradise. The petting zoo section sat near the center of the event. Dozens of families had already gathered around the pens. There were signs with animal names: Boots the piglet, Jellybean the bunny, Nacho the duck. Lena's eyes lit up the moment she spotted a cage with 2 floppy-eared rabbits tucked inside a bed of hay. "Mom," she whispered, "they're right there. That's them. That's Jellybean and Marble." Danielle smiled. "Let's go say hello." But as they began to roll forward, weaving between people and folding chairs, the atmosphere subtly changed. The cheerful hum quieted just slightly. A figure in beige heels and a pressed polo shirt appeared in their path, arms crossed, face tight with disapproval. She stood with the posture of someone who expected to be obeyed without question. And though Danielle didn't know her name yet, the energy was unmistakable. They'd just met their first roadblock of the day. Victoria Langston had a reputation that preceded her, at least to those unlucky enough to cross her path. Technically the HOA secretary, she wielded her title like a badge of moral superiority. She didn't run the HOA, but she believed she should. She was the type who made passive-aggressive comments about lawn colors, who measured kids' chalk drawings with a ruler, who gave out fines for unauthorized Halloween decorations. And today she had appointed herself Queen of the Petting Zoo. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, her tone anything but apologetic. "You can't bring that into the pen area." Danielle blinked, taken aback. This is my daughter's wheelchair." Victoria nodded curtly. "Yes, and those tires will leave indentations. We just had the mulch replaced." Lena looked up at her mum, confused. Danielle tried to stay calm. "The event flyer said this was accessible." "It is," Victoria replied quickly. "There's a viewing area right outside the enclosure. You can park her there, and she can watch." Lena's mouth fell open. "But I wanted to pet the animals." "Sweetheart," Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's just not safe. The goats could get startled. They might jump. We can't risk it." Danielle's jaw clenched. "She's not a safety hazard. She's a child who came to pet rabbits like everyone else." Victoria crossed her arms tighter. "And I'm doing what's best for the animals and the other children. I don't have time to explain logistics to every parent who takes things personally." That was the moment something inside Danielle started to simmer. She could feel Lena shrinking beside her, her joy deflating like a balloon with a slow leak. This was supposed to be a magical day. It was supposed to be the moment Lena forgot about her limitations. And now, in front of everyone, she was being told she didn't belong, not because of anything she did wrong, but because of who she was. "We're not moving," Danielle said firmly. "If you have a problem with that, go find someone in charge." "I am in charge," Victoria snapped. "And if you don't comply, I'll have you escorted out of the event." Heads were starting to turn. A group of parents nearby exchanged glances. A teenager with a phone casually lifted it, recording low to the ground. Lena sat still, her hands clutched in her lap, her lower lip trembling. "I just wanted to pet the bunnies," she said softly. Victoria ignored her. Either move your child out of the pen area now, or I will. Danielle stared hard at the woman, her instincts flaring. You touch my daughter, she said slowly, and I will end your career in this neighborhood so fast your name will be a punchline before dinner. Victoria scoffed. Is that a threat? No, Danielle replied. That's a promise. But Victoria, stubborn, arrogant, and oblivious to the storm she was about to unleash, took a step forward anyway. And that's when everything began to spiral out of control. Danielle didn't even have time to react. 1 second, Victoria was wagging her manicured finger, and the next, her hands were on Lena's chair. With a stiff yank, she tried to turn the wheels as if Lena were a stroller in the way of her schedule. The wheelchair jerked. Lena gasped and her small hands flew up, instinctively reaching for something to hold on to. The sudden motion unbalanced the chair slightly and the front caster hit a patch of loose mulch. It tilted. Danielle lunged, but it was too late. The left side of the chair dipped, and Lena, startled and frightened, let out a cry as her body slid sideways and hit the ground with a soft but painful thump. The entire petting area seemed to pause. The goats stopped chewing. A child dropped his balloon. The music playing faintly over the speaker system didn't mask the sound of Lena's pain as she whimpered, trying to sit up. Dirt clung to her sweatshirt, and her elbow was scraped. Her face was twisted not just in discomfort but confusion. Confusion at how something so simple, so innocent, had turned into humiliation. Danielle was on her knees beside her daughter in seconds, gently checking her arms, brushing off debris. "Baby, are you okay? Talk to me," Lena sniffled. "I didn't do anything wrong, Mommy, I was just sitting there." Danielle's voice trembled as her anger boiled over. "She pulled you. She yanked your chair." Lena looked up, tears brimming. "Why? I didn't even touch the rabbits yet." Danielle turned her gaze to Victoria, who stood a few feet back now, face flushed and arms crossed like she was the one who'd been wronged. "You assaulted my child," Danielle said, voice shaking. "You put your hands on her. You dragged her wheelchair like it was a shopping cart. What is wrong with you?" Victoria scoffed. "You're being dramatic. I was guiding her out. She lost balance. Don't try to twist it. You're just looking for something to blame." By now, a circle had formed. Dozens of parents and children were staring, whispering, some holding phones out, filming. One older woman said loudly, "That little girl didn't deserve that. Shame on you." Another muttered, "That woman needs to be removed from the board, now." Victoria, realizing the tide of public opinion had shifted, straightened her shirt and turned to address the growing crowd. "This is being blown way out of proportion. I was doing what I was supposed to. We can't cater to everyone's unique needs if it endangers the rest of the guests." Danielle stood, brushing her jeans off, every muscle in her body tense. "No," she said, her voice quiet but lethal. "You didn't care about safety. You didn't even care about the animals. You saw a girl in a chair, and you decided she didn't belong." Victoria's mouth opened like she was going to rebut again, but something behind Danielle caught her attention and her eyes widened slightly. Danielle turned to see a man approaching, tall, with a press badge clipped to his collar and a camera bag over his shoulder. She didn't recognize him right away, but he looked familiar. "I'm from the Oak Grove Community Bulletin," he said gently, kneeling beside Lena. "Is she okay?" Danielle hesitated. "Physically, I think she'll be all right. Emotionally, she just got thrown out of a public event for being in a wheelchair." The man nodded. "I caught most of it. I've been covering the fair all morning. I'm honestly in disbelief." Danielle's brow furrowed. "Wait, you recorded it?" He lifted his phone. "Every second, from the moment that woman touched her chair." Danielle exhaled. "Thank God." Victoria's color drained as she processed the implication. "You can't record people without consent. That's illegal." The man stood, unimpressed. "Actually, it's a public event. And more importantly, what I saw could be considered assault on a child. That's a story." Victoria backed away, panic flashing in her eyes. "No one's going to care. She's just trying to stir the pot. You're all just making this into something it's not." Danielle picked up Lena, cradling her in her arms like she had when Lena was a toddler. She looked down at the woman who'd ruined her daughter's afternoon and said, "You have no idea who you just messed with." As Danielle carried her daughter to the first aid tent, escorted by 2 volunteers and the sympathetic journalist, the whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs turned into outrage. Parents were discussing the HOA's history, other incidents, the unchecked power that some members abused. A few children even ran up to Danielle afterward with flowers they'd picked from the edge of the park. One little boy whispered, "I hope your daughter feels better. She didn't do anything wrong." And while Lena sat under a shade umbrella sipping water and cuddling a stuffed llama from one of the booths, Danielle made a decision. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug. She wasn't going to let her daughter grow up believing that bullies in blazers could get away with public humiliation. By the time the sun set, Danielle had already called her firm's legal team. She wasn't going to send an email. She wasn't going to make a complaint. She was going to launch something far more powerful, a reckoning, because the world needed to see what happens when you mess with a child who just wanted to pet a bunny. And tomorrow everyone in Oak Grove, and far beyond it, would know exactly who Victoria Langston was. By morning, the story wasn't just a neighborhood scandal, it was a wildfire. What had started as a single post on a local community page exploded overnight. The headline was short but impossible to ignore. HOA official accused of assaulting child in wheelchair at public fair. Beneath it, a blurry freeze frame of Victoria Langston's scowling face beside a collapsed wheelchair, and a terrified girl gripped the public's attention. The comments came in waves, first from Oak Grove residents, then from neighboring counties, and before long, from complete strangers across the country. Thousands of people were outraged. Parents posted about their own children with disabilities, sharing heartbreakingly similar stories of exclusion, discrimination, and humiliation. Advocacy pages reshared the footage. One disability rights activist called it a disgraceful display of unchecked power. And by mid-morning, hashtags like #JusticeForLena and #HOA Reform Now were trending regionally. Danielle's inbox was flooded. Some emails were from lawyers offering pro bono help, others from families thanking her for standing up. Even local politicians weighed in, issuing statements that condemned the behavior as completely unacceptable and calling for a full investigation into the HOA's practices. And yet, the Langstons remained silent. There was no apology, no statement, no attempt to repair the damage. That silence only fueled the anger. Victoria's face began appearing in national news articles. Headlines turned harsher. Community leader attacks child over wheelchair access. Ableism in broad daylight. HOA event turns violent. And is this the face of suburban power abuse? At the next HOA meeting, which was supposed to be a routine budget discussion, the turnout shattered expectations. Over 200 residents showed up, some of whom hadn't attended a single HOA event in years. The room was electric with fury. People held printed stills of Lena on the ground. Others carried handmade signs with slogans like, "Our neighborhood, not your playground," and "Children deserve better." When Richard Langston, HOA president and Victoria's husband, entered the room, the crowd fell silent. But it wasn't respect. It was anticipation. He approached the podium with visible discomfort. "We understand emotions are high," he began, "but this is a place for order and solutions, not hysteria." That was all it took. A woman near the front stood up. "Order? You think dragging a child out of her wheelchair is an issue of order?" Another voice called out, "Why hasn't she been removed yet? Why is she still on the board?" Richard raised his hands to calm the room, but the floodgates had opened. Person after person stood up, each one sharing a story, a grievance, or simply stating what everyone was thinking, that the board had protected its own for too long. One father choked up as he recalled how Victoria once cited his autistic son for disruptive sidewalk behavior because he flapped his hands too much during walks. Another woman described how her elderly mother was fined for putting up a welcome home banner when her son returned from deployment. "It's not just about Lena," she said. "This is about the culture you created." Richard tried to defend his wife. He claimed she was under pressure that day and that she only meant to de-escalate, but the crowd was done listening to excuses. "She assaulted a child in front of witnesses," one resident shouted. "Stop pretending this is just a misunderstanding." Then came the motion. A board member named Sheila Simmons, who'd long been quiet at meetings, finally spoke up. "I move for a vote of no confidence in Victoria Langstons' position as HOA Secretary and in your leadership, Richard, for failing to act decisively." The room burst into applause. Richard turned pale. "You can't seriously—" But the votes were cast then and there. A show of hands, one by one, until the sea of raised arms left no room for ambiguity. They were done, with both of them. Outside, news vans waited. Reporters hounded the Langstons as they exited. Richard, stone-faced, refused to comment. Victoria, shielded by dark sunglasses, pushed past the cameras without a word. But it wasn't just the press they had to worry about anymore. The Langstons' home became the center of protests, peaceful but firm. Advocates, neighbors, and families stood outside their pristine white fence holding signs like "Inclusion is a right" and "HOA, ill human obligation always." Flowers and cards were delivered to Danielle's home daily. One note from a fourth-grade class read, "Dear Lena, you are brave and beautiful. Thank you for being you." Lena read each one with wide eyes, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying. She didn't fully understand the scope of what was happening, but she felt it. The weight of the world finally leaning in her direction, not against her. And then came the moment no one expected, Richard Langston's resignation. He issued a brief statement through the HOA office. "Due to personal matters and a desire to allow healing within the community, I am stepping down effective immediately." But the real shock came hours later when Danielle received a message from an anonymous tipster. It was a screenshot. Divorce papers. Filed quietly. Richard had moved out of the Langston home. His statement hadn't been a shield for Victoria. It had been his exit strategy. The man who once stood by her in every neighborhood battle had reached his limit. When Danielle told Lena, she simply nodded. "Does that mean she's not the boss anymore?" Danielle smiled gently. "No, sweetheart, she never was." That night, as the house finally settled into silence, Danielle stood by the window and looked out over the neighborhood that had rallied for her daughter. It wasn't just about getting justice anymore. It was about changing the rules, rewriting what power looked like, and making sure no other child ever felt the sting of exclusion again. The HOA had been exposed, the masks had slipped, and the community had chosen to rise, not in anger alone, but in unity. And they weren't done yet. Weeks passed, but the fire never died out. If anything, it transformed, less of a wildfire, more of a steady, purposeful flame. Danielle met with parents, advocates, and legal experts to begin reshaping the rules that governed their community. The newly restructured HOA board, stripped of the Langstons' grip, welcomed these conversations with open arms. One by one, changes were proposed, reviewed, and passed. They called it the Oak Grove Inclusion Initiative. Petting zoos would have dedicated accessible lanes. All HOA events would undergo compliance checks with disability rights organizations. Every board member, past or present, would be required to attend sensitivity training, and a new clause was added to the community charter. Any behavior deemed discriminatory would result in automatic dismissal. It was, for many, just policy. But for Danielle and Lena, it was personal. It was armor. But the changes didn't stop with policies. Actions followed. The next seasonal community fair was renamed Spring for All. The advertising materials featured children of all abilities. Danielle was asked to help coordinate, but she gently declined. "Ask Lena," she said. "She's the one who earned it." And so Lena did. 9 years old, beaming, she rolled across the freshly leveled gravel paths with a clipboard in her lap and a petting zoo map she had helped design. This time, she wasn't a guest. She was a leader. At the far end of the fair, a small wooden sign read, "Lena's Lane, a space where all children belong." It was her idea, her words, her victory. Children lined up at the gate, some in wheelchairs, others with walkers or sensory headphones, all welcomed with wide arms. Lena personally guided each child to an animal, making sure they were comfortable and happy. She had turned the very place where she was once hurt into a space where no one else would be. Somewhere off to the side, Victoria Langston stood quietly among the volunteers. The court had mandated community service as part of her sentence. She wasn't allowed to manage or speak on behalf of any organization, but she was present, carrying folding chairs and wiping down tables. No clipboard, no command. She wore a plain t-shirt and jeans, her once pristine posture now slouched with humility. Some residents still ignored her, others offered polite, distant nods. But for the most part she moved in silence, out of the spotlight she had once craved. Danielle saw her from across the park but said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Consequences had spoken louder than any confrontation. And then something unexpected happened. Weeks later, Danielle received a letter in the mail. No return address, just a simple cream-colored envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 made out to the local disability advocacy group and a handwritten note. "This doesn't undo what I did, but I hope it helps someone else feel seen." There was no signature, but Danielle knew exactly who it was from. And while she didn't trust the sentiment fully, she acknowledged the gesture. Some people grow, some simply break. And maybe, in Victoria's case, both had happened. Meanwhile, Lena's influence began to stretch beyond Oak Grove. A local news segment about the fair went viral, not because of the scandal that started it all, but because of the joy on Lena's face as she helped other children pet rabbits and goats and puppies with no fear or judgment. Requests started coming in from nearby towns. Could Lena come speak to their boards? Could Danielle share her policy drafts? Could they borrow the Lena's Lane model for their own events? And the answer was always yes. What had started as a nightmare was now a blueprint for compassion. Lena was still a child, still obsessed with stickers and jelly beans and drawing foxes in the margins of her notebooks. But when she spoke about her experience, it was as if a light turned on inside her, calm, clear, purposeful. One day, a teacher at her school invited Danielle to speak during a Disability Awareness Week. Lena surprised everyone by raising her hand and asking if she could do it instead. When she stood in front of the gymnasium full of kids and teachers, she didn't speak with anger or bitterness. She talked about fear and kindness. She told them how she felt when someone decided she didn't belong, and how that moment turned into a movement because people chose to care. "I'm not special because I'm in a wheelchair," she said. "I'm special because I didn't stop being me, even when someone tried to make me feel small. And you're special too. So if you ever see someone being treated like they don't matter, please say something, please do something." The applause was thunderous, and in the weeks that followed, parents told Danielle how their children came home talking about Lena, and how they'd started helping kids in wheelchairs carry their trays, or inviting the quiet kid in the corner to join their games. Lena's words were planting seeds, and they were blooming. 2 years later, a new law passed in the state legislature. It was modest in scope, but powerful in impact. It required any publicly funded community event to include formal disability access plans and set penalties for non-compliance. They called it the Community Access Act, but most people simply referred to it by its nickname, Lena's Law. Danielle sat in the gallery as the bill passed, tears sliding down her cheeks. She reached over and squeezed Lena's hand. "You did that," she whispered. Lena, now 11, smiled. "We did it, Mom." And at the next Spring for All fair, something quietly poetic happened. A little girl in pink leg braces and a sparkly tutu came wheeling up to the petting zone. She was nervous at first, her mother hovering close by. Lena rolled over to her with practiced grace and said, "Want to meet Butterscotch? She's really soft." The girl nodded. Lena placed a bunny in her lap and said, "She likes it when you talk to her softly." The girl looked up in awe. "Are you Lena?" "Sometimes," Lena grinned. "But today I'm just the bunny boss." And just like that, the legacy of what began as cruelty, humiliation, and pain turned into a living act of kindness. It didn't erase the past, but it made sure the future would be different, for every child who deserved to feel welcome, seen, and powerful, just as they are, and that, more than any headline or hashtag, was what mattered most.